I plan to include a really elaborate high production value intro for this video with jokes and costumes and a cinematic feel, which would have been really cool. But unfortunately, I'm recording this in December 2020, during the closest we've gotten to a dystopian hellscape we've been in a long time. So instead, you are unfortunately going to have to settle for a pretty normal intro. Otherwise, I would have to delay this video even more, and I'm sure, as you know, Cyberpunk and delays together can be... This intro won't hook you like what I had planned, but you should definitely stick around as we talk about one of the most controversial card game flops of all time, the idea of Cyberpunk itself, and share some long hidden secrets directly from the mouth of a forgotten game's creator. Let's go. Last time on TCG Time Capsule, we took a look at Luck and Logic, a rather recent card game with more boobs than sense. This time we're going to be covering the 2003 Cyberpunk card game. I've been engrossing in the Cyberpunk universe for months now in preparation for the new Cyberpunk 2077 video game, and now it's time for me to share some of that knowledge with you. To be clear, since it can get confusing, the brand Cyberpunk and the science fiction genre of cyberpunk are two separate things. Cyberpunk is cyberpunk, but not all cyberpunk is cyberpunk. Cyberpunk, the genre, originated in the new wave boom of science fiction of the 1960s and 70s. Getting into what the new wave is in detail is a bit out of the scope of this video, so I'll link to a great extra sci-fi video that explains it in the description. But in short, Cyberpunk is part of a shift away from the cheesy, squeaky clean pulp science fiction of the 40s and 50s. Cyberpunk specifically focuses on dystopian future cities with themes of corporate control, rebellion, cybernetic augmentation of the human body, sexual freedom, and drug use. While many of you may not be familiar with the novels that kicked off the genre, like Philip K. Dick's incredible Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or William Gibson's short story John A. Mnemonic, you are probably familiar with the many works that have drawn from them, like the movies Blade Runner or The Matrix, or if you're an anime fan, Akira and Cowboy Bebop, or if you prefer video games, both the Deus Ex series and Hideo Kojima's Snatcher are basically cyberpunk simulators. Now, Cyberpunk the brand is a tabletop role-playing game series that started in 1988, written by Mike Pondsmith and published by R. Talsorian Games, using their Interlock role-playing system. Most editions of the game are denoted by the year in the timeline they take place in, beginning in the 2010s. With the new video game being Cyberpunk 2077, which is the furthest into the somewhat retconned timeline we have ever seen. The newest edition of the tabletop role-playing game, Cyberpunk Red, is a direct prequel to the video game, and was intended to release before 2077's launch, but it was delayed for a significant amount of time due to current worldwide events happening throughout 2020. Cyberpunk has been a consistently well-received role-playing series, but it has been rather underground compared to other more successful series like Dungeons & Dragons or Call of Cthulhu. The series has received two video game adaptations, the aforementioned Cyberpunk 2077, and the much less well-known Cyberpunk Arasaka's Plot for J2ME phones from 2007. The series has also received two completely unrelated trading card games. The game actually named Cyberpunk, released in 2003, and the earlier and much more successful Netrunner, created by Richard Garfield, who you may know as the guy who created Magic the Gathering. For this video, we'll be covering the 2003 game since 1, it's actually called Cyberpunk, and I need that search engine ranking, and because a video on Netrunner needs some real dedication to it, considering it is one of the most praised card games of all time, and has a history stretching 3 decades and 2 completely different publishers. Maybe I'll have that video done by the release of Cyberpunk 2077's standalone multiplayer game. Maybe. Now that we've got that out of the way, we can actually start talking about the card game this video is about. Yes, we're finally actually talking about the Cyberpunk card game. Cyberpunk, the CCG, was released in 2003 by Social Games, a part of Image Native Worlds, under license from R. Tosarian Games. It was their first and only published game. The card game launched with the Your First Run starter deck, available at various conventions, and then would see its first booster set release called Cyberpunk the CCG 2013 at Gen Con. This set is essentially an alpha version or a first edition. They would then release a revised booster set, fixing some cards and adding some new ones called Cyberpunk 2020. 6 starter decks would also be released for the game. Before I picked this game up for this episode, I had never played it. This is a first for TCG Time Capsule since our first 2 episodes featured games that I was well versed in. I picked up a lot of loose cards and sealed starter decks on eBay and got ready for some serious research. Since I was going into the game blind, I made sure to be as thorough as possible researching it. For research, I read through over a dozen Wikipedia articles, dug through archived web pages like the now very broken Cyberpunk website, and did possibly the most awesome thing I've ever done for this show. I reached out to Peter Wex, the lead designer for Cyberpunk CCG, and he graciously agreed to do a full interview with me all about his time with Social Games. We posted the full interview here. He answered a ton of my questions that I couldn't have possibly found answers to online. Peter is a published author. If you'd like to show him your appreciation for helping to document card game history, I've included a link to his Amazon store page where you can buy one of his awesome novels in the description of this video. One of the many sources I looked at for this game were the reviews for it on Board Game Geek, where I discovered that this is one of the most polarizing card games I've ever seen. There are plenty of reviews calling it one of the best card games ever, praising it for its deep gameplay and its accuracy to the tabletop RPG version of Cyberpunk. There are also plenty of reviews from people describing how much they disliked it, due to, well, its deep gameplay and its accuracy to the tabletop RPG version of Cyberpunk. That should indicate to you that Cyberpunk CCG's gameplay is fairly advanced. I definitely wouldn't recommend it to someone who hasn't played mini card games before. It's going to be pretty challenging for me to explain the gameplay in a non-long-winded way, but I'll try my best. Each deck runs 1 sponsor card. These essentially represent which of the many factions of Night City you'll be fighting for, and give you a faction-specific bonus and a unique win condition. The 6 sponsor cards are the Mob, which represents organized crime with a focus on controlling locations to achieve victory. The Nomads, basically a Mad Max-style biker gang that provides runners with extra speed and win by collecting vehicles. Your friendly local gangs, who get stat bonuses and win by forming a riot. Biotechnica, who focuses on cybernetic attachments and win by stripping away their own humanity with empathy loss. NCPD, Night City's police force that wins by arresting the opponent's runners, and Militech, the most combat-focused faction that wins by amassing aggressive power. A 7th sponsor card was released in the Your First Run decks, Arasaka, a Japanese super corporation that wins by building up a massive wall of defense. The sponsor mechanic is one of my favorite parts of the game. It's really unique for the time and offers a ton of variety and asymmetrical gameplay. It reminds me a lot of later games that would separate cards based on specific attributes, like Future Card Buddy Fight's World Flags or Hearthstone's Heroes. That's right, I can't get through a single episode of this show without mentioning Future Card Buddy Fight. In Cyberpunk, you have 2 separate decks, the Runs deck and the Gears deck. The Runs deck tends to have things that you need to do in order to win, such as location, ops, and events, while the Gear deck will have runners, equipment, and cyberware. You win the game by completing your faction's unique win condition or by having 100 ops points, which you get for completing ops cards or by collecting 100 style points, which are displayed on your runners, their equipment, and their cyberware. It's the only game I know of where you can win the game by being cool. You'll naturally move towards these goals as the game progresses, and your main gameplay loop is buying runners and their gear with cash, and using them in groups to run missions for you to collect ops points and even more cash. You have a great deal of flexibility with your team of runners. Not only can you pair them up in any combination of teams you like, but you can equip each of their limbs with equipment and cyberware. The difference between the two is that cyberware cannot be removed. To complete an op, control a location, or burn a stash, you attack your objective with a team during the action phase of the turn. This is mostly done by comparing the team's combined SR on the untapped runners with added LR to the defender's combined defense. Losers lose all of their equipment, unless they have a specific ability to prevent that loss. And if a loser has no equipment, they are burned, aka dead. If the objective is not a team of defending runners, but is instead an op or location, you can control it by having a strong offensive team. Now that we've taken a brief, yes, brief, look at gameplay, let's look at art direction. The Cyberpunk card game has a very consistent art style that really puts you into the world of Night City. Lots of thick outline characters with bright hair and dark locations. The game also uses a very dark, tech-themed frame for its cards, setting the atmosphere well. Peter also pointed out that they used a really cool algorithm to make the small details of each card's borders unique. How cool is that? My favorite card for this game is a location card, specifically this one, Taco Hut. Peter and I talked about this card in our interview. He also really enjoyed it. What an amazing card. Let's add it to the patent-pending time capsule binder, where it shall be immortalized till the end of time. When Cyberpunk TCG came out, it was a pretty serious success out the gate. Social Games had a great reception at every convention they brought the game to. Board game media outlets were very impressed with the game, and many reviews were written, along with several interviews with Peter. Sales for the first set also started off very strong. So what went wrong? It's rare to see a new card game get such a well-organized release with such a warm response from players and not even make it to the second booster set. Looking at our last episode, the TCG timeline, the 2003 release puts it right in the middle of the Flood era, a time where the card game market was healthy and growing. The game also had the benefit of a built-in install base thanks to players of the Cyberpunk tabletop game trying the game out. Again, it's hard to see how this could have gone wrong. Well, Peter explained it to me. The issues weren't external issues caused by pressure in the market, they were internal issues with Social Games. Cyberpunk CCG was Social Games' first product. Most of the team were new to, well, everything that comes with releasing a major card game. Peter specifically cited an overall lack of business experience and over-ambition as the primary causes of the game's downfall. Social Games was a young company stirred on by strong initial sales. They hired a lot of people and spent a lot of money traveling to every trade show possible. To put it bluntly, they ran out of money. Social Games would be dissolved before they even got to the second booster set. Peter and the team were instructed to destroy the remaining stock the company had, which was a lot. Rather than do that, they wheeled the pallets outside and told the fan base to just swing by the office and they could have it all. That likely is the reason why you can still find sealed product for the game for pretty cheap. Something that was great for me, since I was able to acquire a pretty sizable collection, including all 6 starter decks and a ton of bulk for less than what I pay for snacks at a normal game day at my local game store. An expansion set for the game called Chrome and Kilobytes was planned for a summer 2004 release. The set would have included 3 new sponsors: It never made its way to the printers, but I have heard that text-only versions of the cards have been uploaded to the internet that you can print yourself, though I personally haven't found them. Peter also planned for small, fixed card expansion sets that would have cleverly been called City Blocks. None of them were ever released. Now we have reached the part of the episode where we ask if the game should be revived for another shot at life. Should it be rebooted? As much as I have really enjoyed my time with the Cyberpunk CCG, I have to say no. My reasoning has nothing to do with the quality of the game. The way I see it, there are three major reasons why this particular Cyberpunk card game should not come back in any official sense. First, we have no real demand for it. There's no shortages of ways to get your Cyberpunk fix. If you really need to play a card game based on your favorite future city, then there's always Netrunner or the standalone Cyberpunk 2077 Afterlife card game made by ComeOn. Second is the overall game complexity. I'm not saying that modern card game players are stupid. Rather, that the entire industry has been streamlined so much to make the games easier to understand. Cyberpunk CCG feels like an old school card game, and those who have never experienced that environment would really struggle with it. And third, the Cyberpunk brand has changed so much since the old days that I feel capturing the unique feel that the Cyberpunk CCG has would be a challenge these days, especially with how notable the brand is now. I don't think the indie vibe of the original could be recaptured with a modern corporate mentality. That being said, I think that fan-made sets for this game would be awesome. Now we move on to a new section for TCG Time Capsule, where we will be rating the card game based on certain metrics to determine just how well it stacks up compared to the hundreds of other forgotten games. First, art. This is where we'll be rating a game's art direction and general aesthetic. Cyberpunk gets a 5 out of 5. Easy, no question about it. I love the art of the game, it speaks to me on a personal level. Next is price. This is a measure of how easy it is to pick up some decks to play or build a nice collection. It's always nice to get some deals. For price, Cyberpunk gets a 4 out of 5. Cards remain pretty cheap for now, with the exception of the Your First Run deck, which has become quite collectible. Next is collectability. Here we will weigh how enjoyable the game is to collect. This could have to do with print runs or just how many interesting exclusive cards there are, but essentially it's a measure of how impressive having a full collection of that game would be to your average card fan. Cyberpunk gets a 3 out of 5. I definitely recommend hunting down some of those UV foil cards that Peter showed off in the interview. Last is gameplay. How fun is this title to play? It's as simple as that. Well, in this case, it's pretty hard to say due to the game's polarizing nature, but I have to respect the ambition and the uniqueness of the title. Let's go with a 4 out of 5. Now that we have shed some light on a really cool card game that has wrongfully been forgotten, I hope some of you out there will pick up some cards for it, or at least give it a shot in Tabletop Simulator. The gameplay really is good, but it does take some time to get used to it. Thanks again to Peter Wex for making this episode possible, and thanks to all of you for watching. Let me know what dead or forgotten card games you'd like to see covered in the next TCG Time Capsule episode, and you can help support the show by using our TCG Player affiliate link or by joining our Patreon. And that's our review guys today, so I'll see you next time.